Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody around the world. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today's session is Unlocking Transformation, how model-aware process intelligence delivers results and why process mining isn't enough. I'm Don Hart. I'm going to be your host for today. Before we get started, just a couple of quick notes. One, everyone is muted, but we really encourage you to submit questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll cover them at the end. Secondly, a link to this recording will be sent to all registrants in a follow-up email. So with that, let's jump into today's agenda. We'll begin with the challenge, what organizations are facing as they try to transform. Next, we'll look at process mining, its strengths, its limits, and why it's valuable but not sufficient on its own. From there, we'll speak about model-aware process intelligence. It's the next step beyond mining. We'll then go deeper into the repository advantage, the foundation that ties everything together. After that, we'll highlight the real-world value, the tangible outcomes that companies are achieving today. Finally, we'll wrap up with that Q&A session where you'll have the chance to ask your questions. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Shoaib Javid. He is our Chief Product Officer. Shoaib will take us into the challenge and set the stage for today's session. Shoaib.
Thank you, Don. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining. So before I dive into the content, I know we are introducing you to yet another term, model-aware process intelligence. And it's not one more thing to keep track of because I think you intuitively know what we are going to talk about. So I'll explain and demystify what that means and why it's the new way to approach process intelligence and how it can bring you and your organization value. Okay, so let's begin with the obvious. So every company, every customer we talk to is looking to see how they can transform their business processes using AI, right? It's something that's on the roadmap of pretty much all organizations and all customers we deal with. So there is a tremendous opportunity here in this next phase of transformation, which is you're not just making processes a little bit faster or cheaper, but you're now able to fundamentally transform your processes to be smarter, more adaptive, and more valuable, right? So the idea here is that you're reimagining and reinventing how you do business, how you do operations in the age of AI, which then drives your execution strategy, right? So you got to think first, ask the right questions, be more imaginative before you actually implement something. So that's the opportunity, right? To fundamentally transform how you do business, where your processes are more adaptive and more valuable. So that's the opportunity, but there are a number of challenges to actually implement AI-based transformation, right? So the first thing is to try and tie your strategy to actual execution, right? And of course, that seems pretty straightforward or something that's very logical. But in order to tie your strategy to execution, you first have to have a strategy, right? So again, AI is not going to create your strategy, right? You have to create a strategy that says, what do you want, right? If you imagined a utopia or a blue sky world, how would you now implement your business processes given the capabilities that are offered by AI to do things that were never possible before, right? So you have to be the person that does the imagination to create the strategy. And then you can use AI to execute that strategy and help you bring that to fruition, okay? The second part is, right, it's very important to align your business goals with whatever you're doing to transform, right? Because this again, is the main reason why most transformation projects don't work, because at the end of the day, you haven't picked the right outcomes or goals, or B, you haven't figured out how to measure them so you can decide whether you're succeeding or not, right? Those two things will cause the inevitable failure of transformation efforts, because you don't know where you are, you don't know what your baseline is, and you don't know whether you have achieved your goals or you're actually on your way to do that, right? And then the last thing is, never underestimate change management, right? So it's not just about technology, it's about making sure that the organization and the people buy into whatever goals, whatever transformation goals that you're driving, right? So again, balancing out a huge opportunity, because I believe personally that every business process in every company in every business industry vertical will have to be reimagined with AI at its core. Okay, so that's the opportunity, but then to practically implement it, you have to overcome the challenges I talked about, right? So the shift now is from simple automation to going into augmenting your business processes and eventually to autonomous optimization, right? So which is not only AI executing your processes, but also using that execution to optimize continuously. Okay. So all of this, um, to actually achieve all of this, process intelligence plays a big role, right? So let's jump into process intelligence. Let's start with process mining. So everyone in the audience, if you're coming to this webinar, I assume you're familiar with process mining, right? So process mining is a great solution that allows you to understand your as-is processes, right? So what you're doing is you're looking at your enterprise applications and traces of your processes within those enterprise applications to decipher what it is that you do today. So it's good at baselining, what your existing processes look like, and it can also help you find inefficiencies, right? You can say, okay, well, there are these portions of your processes where you take too much time, or there's too much rework, or there is some problem with customer satisfaction because you have to wait too long to finish something, right? So there's a number of things that process mining can highlight by looking at how you do things today. And that's great. But what we are saying is that that is not enough for you to do the transformation, right? That is a part of what you need to know. What is missing from process mining is the context, right? The why. So what's missing is, what is your intended process, right? So how did you imagine things should work? And what's important for you to measure and improve for that process, right? What should your process be like? Not what you're doing, but what should you do, right? So that context is missing. And that context is created by information provided by people, right? Like, okay, who's responsible for the process, right? Who's involved, what kind of regulatory requirements and controls need to be achieved, what are the interdependencies between those processes, what kinds of strategies does this process serve. So there's a number of questions and thoughts that go around designing effective processes that you can't simply get from how you're doing things, right? That's something that you have to intentionally do so that you can then measure and improve your outcomes, right? What process mining can do is augment your understanding of that process by, in the beginning, helping you create those models faster, because you can take your as is process, use that information to start the model, but then you have to decide how the process should work and so on, right? So there's a shift now, right, from just understanding what I do and transparency to how do I want to change and what do my models look like that will allow me to change. And that's where we are getting now into the model aware process intelligence, right? I start with the design, I start with my imagination, and then I add data to augment it, and then I implement it to make things better. Okay. All right. So what exactly is this shift, right? So let's get a little bit more detail, right? So what process mining does is it actually looks at logs. And logs are just instances of things that occur at a point in time, right? So you ended up, shipping something, or you created an invoice, or you delivered goods, or you know, checked inventory. So you do a number of tasks, and there is a log of that task in your system. Process mining reads those logs to then construct a view of your process, right? So, okay, that's one way of looking at it, but again, it doesn't tell you why. Right? So, for example, say you're doing order to cash process, and what process mining would tell you is, hey, there is a big gap between you charging a customer credit card and checking inventory and delivering your goods, right? It'll tell you, hey, there's a, I don't know, 3 days delay. What it doesn't tell you is that according to your process, you should have first checked inventory and then charged the credit card, because if you don't have the inventory, there's no point in charging the customer and then causing disappointments and returns, right? So that context of I'm doing things wrong, which is not my intention, wouldn't be discovered by process mining, right? It would be something that the model will tell you you're doing things in the wrong order, or that you should have done this first and then something else, but 45% of the people are not doing that, so let's fix that behavior, rather than trying to optimize the delay, quote unquote, right? Because that gives you a much better way to think about things, right? So the model now contains metadata about the process, like roles and responsibilities, policies and risks, relationships, strategies, requirements. And it also gives you a history of changes to your process, right? Why did you change your business process? What was the reason? What caused the changes? And you can go backwards and say, hey, here's the reason, right? Here's what we did. And then here's why we did it. And here's how things may or may not have improved after we did something, right? So that's one part of being aware, having a model, tying enterprise objects to it, tying data to it, and then using process mining to augment that. So what process mining can do is, once you have a model, it will tell you how long things take, what's the gap between activities. It will tell you a whole number of other data points, right? How often do orders arrive? How many orders you're processing at any given week, month, quarter, right? So it'll give you all of that information that can get overlaid on top of your model, and now you have everything you need to baseline and optimize your process, right? So I hope you see that difference between simply understanding and getting transparency of what is occurring, to then looking at context and putting that into that context, right? So that's the model aware process. And also all that information is stored in a process repository, which can then be fed into AI to then improve those processes, okay? All right. So let's get into this in a little more structured way, right? So what is model aware process intelligence then? It integrates mining, modeling, and the process repository, as well as simulation and predictive analytics, right? So I'll go into each one. So the first one is just getting the execution insight, right? How things actually work in the real world, which comes from mining. You then have the context and governance of your model processes, which is stored in a process repository. And instead of simply analyzing problems that have occurred in the past, you can also use simulation and predictive analytics to forecast or foretell the future, right? To get foresight and head off problems before they occur. So you have the understanding of what you're doing. You have the let me imagine, think about what my business should be, and also let me predict and simulate based on my execution insight to see if I'm going to encounter problems in the future and head them off before they occur, right? So that is the predictive analytics. And what simulation also does is it that allows you to do what if scenarios, right? It says, okay, I've discovered what I do today. What if I did that, or I changed something else, or I added more people, or I added a piece of machinery, or I added a piece of software? What will happen to the process? Now, you don't want to execute this in real world in production every time you do a what if scenario, right? That's too expensive, because you spend, you know, thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars buying that equipment or adding more people or building automation, and then find out that, hey, your strategy was not right, your model was not correct. But simulation allows you to run real world data, execution data through your model, so you can then test your model before actually deploying that into production, right? So again, that helps you, right? Because now you can build 10 different models, run your execution data through those models, and say, I pick this one because it best optimize the characteristics of the process I'm looking to optimize, right? And so that's how you get from business operations to business value. So, so think about that aspect. And what's happened in the past is, because process mining has become so popular, people jump directly from discover to optimize. They don't go through the design part at all. And I think that's the big mistake, right? You can't just go from discovery to optimization. You got to think about the whole thing. You got to really have some intention of what you're going to optimize. And then that's how you do that, right? So again, model-aware process intelligence then supports a better, safer transformation so that you can check things out before you actually implement them. It's also got compliance built into the entire process through design. And it also aligns your strategy to execution by making sure that you're measuring outcomes against the model, against the strategy, against the metrics every single time. Okay, so why does it matter, right? Why does any of this matter that much? Why can't you just do something ad hoc and get some benefit and be happy with it, right? So there is again a real shift in how people's expectation about process intelligence or process mining or the whole BPM uh, discipline in general, right? So what organizations now want to do is they don't want to have just visibility, right? They just don't want just transparency. So before you could say, okay, I do some analysis, I look at my processes, I say, here are problems, here are some issues, and a process mining company will tell you, oh, I can save you $10 million, right? So I found these issues, and if you take care of them, it'll save you $10 million. And then the companies realize that, okay, well, that's nice analysis, I see it, but then how do I actually realize the savings that you're predicting that I should realize, right? So now it's more about, I don't want to simply see the savings, I don't want to simply analyze the savings, I want to achieve them in reality. And in order to do that, right, you have to actually follow that through to operations and also measure the outcomes, right? So you have to have a system of measurement that allows you to measure your outcomes so you can show in reality that the savings that you predicted were actually implemented. And then when you ran those new processes, they were realized, right? So you have to close that loop, right? And people don't do that. And then the other thing you're doing with this model aware intelligence is you're building this data set, right? You're building a curated process data set that is good, right? You know that your models are good, you know that the metadata is good because you have thought through it, right? So when you train AI, right, or use AI to answer questions, you have this repository of data, of process information, of process context that you're working from that is known good data, right? And that also includes considerations for compliance and for risk and all of those things. So that serves as a really nice basis from which AI can operate, right? So all of you must have heard this term RAG, right? Repository assisted generation. What that simply means is instead of getting information from the entire open world, AI can now get information from a certain repository, right? And that repository assisted generation or a vector database that holds that repository that you know is known good will give you much better answers. And you know that that will prevent hallucinations and it'll prevent you from getting absurd answers, right? Because the answers can only come from the information that is stored within your repository. That's how you get to better outcomes when you're using AI, lower AI ops costs. as well as you get more resilient customer journeys that are enabled by compliance and foresight. Okay. All right. So that's what I've been leading to, right, to say that the repository is the key, right? That single process repository that holds data from many different sources, right? So it holds data from process mining, it holds data from your models, it holds your strategy information, it holds your people information, and it holds your risk and compliance information in a single repository. The repository is also connected to your execution systems, your enterprise applications, and serves then as a single source of truth for everything that's related to a process, right? So all information related to a process is now stored in a single repository. That model gets enriched when you do process mining because you add real world contextual data. You also update your ownerships, risks, and compliance by getting that information from external GRC systems or external other systems that hold that information. And then that serves as the baseline for sustainable transformation that you can measure, right? Because that measurement of setting a baseline, measuring improvements against that baseline, setting a new baseline and measuring improvements again. So you're constantly resetting baselines and measuring improvements, and that's what gets you the continuous transformation and then ability to know whether you're succeeding or failing and to know how much investment is leading to what kind of outcomes that you're looking for. Okay. So again, this of course is also self-evident, right? That when you do deploy AI, it's important to make sure that you have governance and compliance that are addressed, right? So you can't just randomly throw your process information out there into the open world and expect results to be accepted by your business, right? So you must be grounded in governed process intelligence, compliance and risk management needs to be covered, right? You need to take into account your standard operating procedures, perhaps just feed them to AI to generate the models to begin with, right? And then once you have that digital twin or that model, you can then use AI for orchestration, for automation, for agentic process execution, right? A number of things can be done when you have good information and a way of collecting that information and curating it, right? So again, there has to be that governance, there has to be security, there has to be risk management, and that like is something that again process intelligence in general helps with because you need that process information. Without that, you cannot actually execute automation because then you really don't know what you're doing, right? You're just randomly doing something and you don't know why and for what purpose, right? So having that model awareness will help AI orchestrate properly and also lead to that concept I was talking about of semi-autonomous or autonomous optimization, right? So where you're optimizing on your own because you're looking at all the patterns within your data as you're doing real world executions and collecting that data back into the model, right? And that will then allow you to look at those patterns and those models and automatically optimize your processes without actually thinking about them as you execute them. Okay. So again, in the real world now, right, it's not theory anymore, right? This thing is evolving faster than all of us expect, right? In the real world, people are using AI-led transformation or agents or process models to either improve some aspect of your process, right? And that includes cost or operational efficiency or customer facing issues, right? Customer satisfaction issues, as well as improving revenue and doing new business models, right? So if you're improving some level of your business operations, right, your top line, your revenue, right, by being able to deliver a better customer experience or being able to deliver better capacity, or you're reducing your operational costs to improve your margins, right? And so you're improving those aspects. or you're improving regulatory requirements, right? So if you're in a regulated industry, if you're in finance, you're in healthcare, right? You're in telecom, right? In those industries, the regulations are very important. And a lot of times, keeping track of those regulations, monitoring them as you're executing your processes, and ensuring real-time compliance or even predicting non-compliance before it occurs will help you keep that part of your business in check, right? So anytime you have a major compliance issue that introduces, reputational risk, it could introduce financial risk, and it could introduce operational risk, right? So making sure that those regulatory, financial, operational, reputational risks are managed is extremely important, along with improving the operational efficiencies of your processes and uh, process intelligence, model-backed process intelligence can help you with all of those things. Okay, finally, right? So we are saying all of these things, right, and talking about model-based intelligence now for a long time, and bringing all of these capabilities of mining, modeling, automation together, and the analysts, right, the industry analysts are validating now this approach, right? So Forrester, I think, is ahead when it comes to thinking about these things in the right way. They just published the Forrester 2025 Forrester Process Intelligence Wave, and iGraphics is ranked as a leader here. That's an independent validation of this model-aware process intelligence, about talking about combination of modeling, simulation, mining, and all of that into a single platform and a single solution that can bring you all of these things together. And if you're interested in learning more about this, of course, reach back out to me or Don or to anybody in iGraphics, go to our website, and you can get information about our Process 360 Live platform that does help you practically implement model-aware process intelligence. Okay, to wrap up, the key takeaways that I want to mention from this webinar is, right, transformation is more than simply improving in some slight way what you do today, right? It's not about making what you do today slightly more efficient. It's about reimagining and rethinking what could be done given the technology landscape available to you today, right? And that requires model-aware intelligence. A process repository is a fundamental foundation of doing this transformation, right? Having process information that includes context, that includes execution data, that includes risk and compliance data, that includes data from your enterprise systems, is key and serves as the data that improves or drives the models that AI work from for doing your transformation. And again, re-emphasizing that point that a model-aware process intelligence platform serves as a foundation for AI-ready operations, right? So without that data, without that foundation, without that knowledge, AI is working in the dark. So you are not going to be able to achieve the outcomes that you expect from AI unless you have that. And so implementing AI-based operations requires process intelligence and requires a repository. And finally, right, this is not just theory, right? All of this has been implemented in practice. All of these technologies have matured. So you can actually achieve practical, demonstrable value today, and with approaches that have been studied and have been approved and validated by industry analysts as well as customers and partners, so that it's ready for prime time right now. So with that, I would like to stop and see if we can go through and answer some questions and have some discussions, right? So Don, I don't know if you got any questions and answers.
We don't have any questions through this webinar yet, but I encourage people to submit some questions here. I do have some that were sent to me earlier, and one of them is, and I think you just answered this question, but how does a model-aware foundation make AI adoption safer, especially as companies move from automation to agentic AI?
Yeah. So I think a model-aware approach, as I talked about multiple times, provides the right curated, good data for AI to work from. It also provides context information so AI can make better decisions. And also, you could keep that repository and that information private without exposing it to general AI so that you can get your answers and results from you know uh, smaller language models or models that you host within your own premise.
Great. Here's one from Kimberly. In organizations using iGraphics, which approach has proven more successful, building out the digital twin internally or receiving external assistance in its development prior to internal adoption and ownership? And what are some of the effective strategies for gaining organizational buy-in for process modeling in iGraphics before introducing improvement opportunities?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that work really well, right? In the beginning, I would recommend getting some professional outside help to get you started. Because what will happen then is that you'll have the right framework and the right structure on how to think about the problem. I would then take it over and not continue that outside help, right? So what I would do is I would get some consulting in the beginning that helps you understand what transformation looks like, how to organize your processes, what are the current best practices for using AI, and then using that information to build your baseline first and build a couple of processes all the way through, and then you can add in from there on, right? Because now you'll understand what needs to be done. Now, as you're doing that, right, that will also help you with organizational adoption. The best way to do organizational adoption, I find, is to actually show value fast, right? So don't do too much. Just take up one or two areas where people can see the results faster. And once they see that, they'll jump on, right? You won't be worried. Then you'll have this avalanche of people that would want the same outcomes, right? So to try to get to outcomes faster for a few people, few processes, that will actually drive the work.
Great. Do these AI features work with on-premises data center installations of iGraphics?
Yes, some of those features will work with the on-prem version of iGraphics. I think simulation is something that is not available on-prem, but a number of other things are. So yes, they could work with on-prem versions of iGraphics also.
Okay. Do we document processes first along with all the associated data, or process mining and or task mining can accomplish that?
So process and or task mining can help you document your processes. It's a good way to jumpstart the process. So what I do is where you do have log data available from your systems, right? If you're running SAP or Salesforce or a number of other enterprise applications, you have that data, you can use process mining or task mining to get a baseline, and then you can add to that, right? I would recommend reviewing what process mining has discovered and then add your knowledge, because process mining will not be a complete source. It'll be one source from many that will get you that information. I would also suggest that if you already have process documentation, you can feed that into AI to also help augment the models. So take a combination approach, right? Do process mining to get a head start, and then add in the human knowledge and information outside of your systems into that process to build that model.
Okay, next question is, what pragmatic phased approach would you recommend for implementing model-aware process intelligence model, i.e. from crawling to running?
Yeah. So here's what I would do, right? And I think I call this the N squared sort of approach, right? So find a process or a business area that you believe is high impact, right? And discuss this with the business, okay, we think that maybe our, you know, 50% or 60% of our revenue comes from this one particular process, right? This is an area that if we even make small changes would make a big difference, right? So find a high value business area, process, or problem, and then see if it's suitable for process intelligence or AI-led improvement, right? So if you take a high value problem and multiply it by suitability for process intelligence or AI, then you'll get a multiplied outcome, right? An n squared outcome. And for the importance of the problem and for the applicability of that, right? So I would take a smaller area and I would actually go all the way to model it out and show the improvement. And then I would add in, right? So the crawl approach would be, don't try to optimize everything. First, just even if you can do process mining in the beginning, right? Just create a process model so that you are at least aware of what you're doing, and then pick some area within that process to optimize, right? And optimization can simply be, hey, we are doing things, optimization could simply be changing the process, right? It has nothing to do with spending money on automation or hiring more people or whatever. It can simply be changing the process to say, hey, now that I put this down on paper and I see it, it seems strange, right? Like we're doing things maybe in the wrong way. And just by changing the process, you could actually deliver value, right? You can then go more sophisticated and add in process mining and add in the data. But if you have access to data, I could start with process mining too, right? It just depends on the situation, but pick a focused, smaller area to begin with, and that would be pragmatic, right? And I would say show success fast, right? Don't go for perfection, go for improvement, right? And if you go for improvement and show success fast, people will jump on to the bandwagon.
Totally agree. This is an interesting one. Tell us more about hosting small models internal. Banks are resistant to have processes and procedures using broader models like Copilot or ChatGPT. So looking to see how to leverage for linkage of procedures that can withstand regulatory review with the processes at a bank.
Yeah. So a number of companies are now considering small language models or uh, hosting this internally inside their data centers. Now, small language models are good, right? They may be able to get you 80% of the way there without requiring large language models. So what you do, right, is you try as much as you can to get by with small language models. And there are multiple available. This is a big topic, right? It's not something that I particularly am an expert in, but I can definitely advise you to look at things and we can talk about it in a much more detailed session. But you can implement small models. They're easy to implement. You can do that on-prem. And they would actually, in a lot of cases, be good enough to answer most of your questions or to get most of the insights you need, right? Without actually going to OpenAI or going to Anthropic or other, Gemini or other large language models, right? And you can also divide the work. You can say, look, my first option is to get it through SLM. And if I can't, I need to get LLM information without sharing anything that I have externally, right? So one way to protect information is to ensure that you never send information out to LLMs to do something, your proprietary information, right? So you can actually structure things that are compliant. And I've looked at a number of regulated companies that are actually building out their infrastructure for this. And so there are ways to solve this problem. And I'm a big fan of SLMs, right? I think they'll reduce costs, but they'll also ensure compliance for certain sensitive data that doesn't go outside your boundaries.
Okay. Where to find the price structure?
For iGraphics, you can, of course,
Yes.
contact us, right? And we'll get you that information, right? We just have to figure out what you want to buy before we can send you pricing, right?
That's all the questions we have. Shoaib, I want to thank you. As always, a great discussion. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. And again, a link to the recording will be sent to all the folks that registered in a follow-up email.